In 1773, there was a particularly bad storm in Table Bay. There were 5 ships of the Dutch East Indian Company laying in the bay. None of the vessels should have been there. Instead, they should have sought anchorage at Simon's Bay, as this was considered to be the safer winter anchorage. It was the company's ruling not to anchor in Table Bay after May 15, due to the unpredictable seasonal weather. For several days, the ships had been ready to put to sea, but a northwesterly gale had been blowing hard and had prevented them from sailing. On May 31st, 1773, the gale had reached its full height, and each of the ships had dropped additional anchors in an effort to hold them steady. Soon, the hawsers holding the anchors began to snap under the pressure of the storm. Worst placed of all was the merchantman, the Jonge Thomas, carrying 207 men and captained by Barend Lammeren. At 5 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of June 1773, she strained on her last anchor. Rather than be caught unprepared and be driven ashore at the mercy of the storm, Lammeren decided to beach the vessel while he could still choose the spot. Accordingly, the anchor rope was cut, and with a light sail set, the ship bore down on the beach. The captain had chosen the level stretch north of the Salt River mouth to run ashore. Unfortunately, he was unaware that the Salt River had burst its banks and was emptying into the sea, near the spot he had chosen. Even more unfortunate, at the moment of impact, the Jonge Thomas swung broadside to the beach. Less than 2 minutes of pounding from the gigantic waves broke the ship's back, and she parted in two at the mainmast. This was the sight that met the eyes of Governor van Plettenberg at dawn, when he scanned the bay anxiously. His first reaction, no doubt, was to breathe a prayer of thanks for the 18 money chests which the Jonge Thomas was carrying from Holland were still ashore in the castle for safe custody. Then he sent 30 soldiers down to the beach. Normally, this procedure was of little avail to the unfortunates wrecked out in the bay, but that day it was to save lives. The first military step, as usual, was to erect a gibbet on the beach, to hang any trespassers. Then the soldiers commenced collecting salvaged goods, periodically casting a sorrowful glance out to sea, where the pitiful cries could be heard from those survivors still clinging to the wreck. Amongst the soldiers was Corporal Christian Woltemade. In the course of the day, his father, Wolraad Woltemade, rode up on horseback to bring him a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread. Wolraad Woltemade was no youngster. As a soldier, he had been stationed at Meisenberg as early as 1752, and by 1770 he was in command of that post. Filled with pity for the luckless sailors aboard the wreck, Woltemade mounted his horse Fleur and urged the animal into the sea, determined to save some of those in peril. Why he did not carry a line to the wreck is not clear, but the fact is that he rode into the sea without a rope. The horse was a fine swimmer and fought its way gamely through the surf. As they approached the wreck, Woltemade turned the horse and called for 2 men from the ship to jump into the sea and grasp the horse's tail. After a moment's hesitation, 2 men threw themselves into the water, whereupon Woltemade urged the horse forward and dragged them to shore. Not satisfied with this feat, Woltemade returned immediately and rescued another 2 men. He repeated this again and again until he had drawn 14 men to safety. By this time, instead of hesitation, there was competition amongst the sailors for the next place. As for the horse, it was staggering with exhaustion. Woltemade dismounted to rest the poor animal, whereupon a great cry of despair went up from the wreck. Despite the entreaties of his son, Woltemade mounted the horse again and rode back into the water. Realizing this was probably the last trip, the men on board lost all restraint. As the laboring animal neared the ship, 6 men jumped into the water and grasped at the horse. One fool caught it by the bridle, dragging the horse's head underwater. It was all over in a moment. Horse, rider and sailor disappeared beneath the waves. No further attempt was made to rescue those aboard the wreck. As night fell, they watched the beach empty as the soldiers returned to their barracks, and the officials to their warm firesides. Through the night, they clung to the wreck in sodden misery until the weather cleared. On the morning of June the 2nd, The sea was still rough, but Jan Jacobs, the junior mate, and 24 men waded ashore from the wreck. In all, 47 men had survived, of whom 14 owed their lives to Woltemade. That day, the shore was littered with bodies. Amongst them were the captain and Wolraad Woltemade. The captain was given an official funeral, but there was nothing so grand for Woltemade. The general opinion at the castle seems to have been that he was an officious fool who had lost his life unnecessarily. In the first report to Holland, his name is not even mentioned, though considerable space is devoted to the 18 boxes of money providentially saved.